And thanks for joining me for another video today. What I'd like to do today is to talk about database normalization. And when you're looking at a database, one of the biggest design focuses is that you first have to look at the data and understand how to normalize that data. And normalization really is a way to present the data to the application that makes it so that the database does the work for you, that the application doesn't have to do a lot of the work. And I think you'll understand those points as we go further on. But you'll understand after a while that database normalization really is more of an art than just a technical task that you need to perform. Literally, it is something that you gain a better feel for with practice and and doing it on a repeated basis. He says, kind of just as a painter has to understand his medium and his subjects, when you design a database, you really have to understand both your tools, the database management systems that you're working with, and the subject, which in your case is the data that you have to manage for your customer, your client, your business people that are within your enterprise. So what happens is that, in my experience, you start with the data. My experience basically has been that if you start by understanding the data will tell you how it needs to be treated and how it needs to be normalized in this case. So as we go through this, I'm going to use the example of a bookstore. And the bookstore basically is going to deal with books. It's going to deal with the information about the books. And of course, a store has an inventory system. So you're going to have stock locations. You're going to have stock that is put on the shelves. You're going to have, of course, locations that can hold many books. You're probably going to have many of the same title. So there's a lot of good information you can learn from just doing a bookstore as an example of normalization. So what we want to do is talk about the first three basic rules of normalization. The first, normal form; second, normal form; and then third, normal form. So what happens then is when you first start looking at the data, first normal form means that you get each field with only one piece of data in it. We know by sad experience that many people in finance or in the business world will tend to want to have their user defined fields, and they'll stuff data in them, and sometimes they'll stuff multiple things in there, or they'll make a field mean several things depending on which character they're talking about. Oh, this was very common in the days of COBOL and in the days of older first generation languages that you didn't really have all that much CPU space or processing space, and you had to conserve the amount of space that you used for the data. Well, that is not the case today. And one of EF Cod's initial pushes towards normalizing databases was to make sure that each cell in a database only addressed one data point. So we would not an example in the bookstore would be if you had a book that had multiple authors, you would have multiple authors referenced in two different cells rather than putting both authors in the one cell. So the first normal form is simply that. Every record every cell in a record has only one piece of data, and then every record is identified by a key field. Now, it tends to be common practice to put an auto number as a key field in some databases where you can't find either a specific key field or a composite key field that you can use. So whichever one you choose, either one works just as well. But each record needs to be unique after that key field so that every record is responsive to just that key and only one key. You definitely don't want to confuse your database as you normalize it by having more than one record that responds to a specific key. So that gets first normal form. Now, once you're in first normal form, then you can go to second normal form. Second normal form basic rule is you're going to get rid of repeating of repeating sets of data. So here we have a bookstore, and I have a location on the shelf, and I decide that I'm going to put 10 books on that shelf. I don't want those 10 books listed 10 different times in my database. I want the one book by the single author or multiple authors. I want that one book listed once in the database, but referred to multiple times in the stock, different stock locations. So I don't have to repeat that data constantly. And then every table that you break off of that, like for example, the book table, has a primary key, which is used as a foreign key to get back to the stock location, so that the stock location knows what book is in that particular location. So if you have a particular stock location that is meant for 20 books, maybe it's a shelf or a bin or what, however, if that particular stock location has 5 copies of one book, you would have 5 different references in that one location for that book. Okay? And then we go to third normal form. What happens a lot of times is that you break up the data into several things. So here's an example. You have the stock location and you've already broken book out of it. Well, a book has an author, but that author doesn't necessarily write only one book and then retire for the rest of his life. You know, you take a Stephen King or a John Grisham or many different authors, they have a lot of different books that they have written. So that author isn't necessarily going to be attached to one group, one particular book. So if you've got a book listed and then you come to an author, well, you've got the authors also duplicated within the book group. So what you do is you split author then into another table. So it's this second group of splitting, that going one more level deep to split off the next level, that allows you to get it into third normal form. And you do that, well, that's what they call transitive dependencies, is you've got books with authors, but authors can write many books. So you've got this transition, this transitive nature going back and forth. So you need to split off those duplicated references in those subtables that are supporting a bigger stock table, for example. Okay, so what I'd like to do then is just to show you the example of an inventory list. Now, this inventory list was a massive spreadsheet that was used by a particular bookstore. And this bookstore was doing everything just on this one sheet of spreadsheets. So every time they had a particular book by an author, they had the book listed there and the author listed there. So the authors were duplicated all the way down. The books were duplicated down when they had more than one book. So you had several situations where you had the stock ID, but the stock ID was meant to tie to a location. The title then was in there. And then, of course, you had the book description and the publisher and the year and the format and the genre. And then you finally come to the author's last name and first name. Okay? So you had all of these things there. So in that particular situation that's showing here on the screen, in this particular situation, what we would do is we would immediately make an authors table. We would immediately make a series table to separate out all the series and just refer to it by reference or by primary to foreign key, to use the terminology. We would have the books separated into a different book table. Each book has its ISBN, and you know, the ISBN might carry a bunch more description, but in this particular table they just put the ISBN attached to that book, so that's fine. And so what you do then is you just look at that data and you start examining the data. You might go in and find out how many times the author is repeated, or you find out how many times the series name is repeated. You might find out how many times a particular title is repeated in the stock. So you look for these duplications. Once you find one, you separate that particular piece of data into its separate table and then associate the tables. Now, in an entity relationship diagram, you would represent it as this table is represented here with the name of the table at the top. The primary key in this case for this particular table is the stock ID. After we split all these things up, you'll have multiple tables like the author table and series table and the book table, and you'll have each one of those with their name up top, book or author or series, and then you would have an ID field that would link back to the inventory list, but the inventory list would then have the foreign key information in it so it can link back to the particular table. So I've gone pretty quickly through all this information. But what you need to understand about normalization is getting it to third normal form is really a minimum as far as creating a database system. A lot of times you get to third normal form. There is a Boyce-Codd normal form, a fourth normal form, a fifth normal form. Those are documented, but they're more obscure and very technical. And generally, third normal form is adequate for most needs. The second thing is that if you're doing a data warehouse, a lot of times you'll back things off and bring things back to second normal form and not get rid of those repeating sets of data in those subtables. That depends on how fast you want your data to be returned in a data warehouse sort of schema. So if you like what we've talked about in this video today, go ahead and write some comments. Let me know if you have any other questions. I'll try to answer those as quick as I can or in a later video. And please subscribe. By doing so, YouTube, it's a free service. They'll let you know when I post my next video. And we'll see you again later. Thanks.